Especially in recent days, we have repeatedly understood that the most strategic key point of the war between Russia and Ukraine is the advantage of dominating the airspace. The vital importance of air defense in attacks with missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles comes to the fore. The Ukrainian armed forces, on the other hand, is in a much better position than the Russians in this regard. Since the beginning of the war, USA-made NASAMS Patriot air defense systems, German-made Iris-T and French-made Crotales have been the guardian angels of the Ukrainian skies. But the Ukrainian army required much more air defense and early detection systems because we have almost come to a breaking point in the war, and missile and drone attacks continue to target Ukrainian cities and civilians almost every day. Therefore, issues such as the advantage in the airspace and the air defense systems were perhaps the critical areas that determine the course of the war. The country that took the last step in this regard was Israel. Surprisingly, Israel has announced that it will support both military and humanitarian aid, especially Benjamin Netanyahu's harsh rhetoric against Russia and his statement that he would support Kiev in this war changed the situation. Recently, a brand new step of military aid by Israel to Ukraine shook the world agenda. Russian leader Vladimir Putin started to worry as a powerful country like Israel after the USA now supports Kiev militarily. Let's explore all the details of this critical step of military aid provided by Israel to Ukraine and discover how this step will contribute to the war. First of all, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, at a press conference in Vienna, confirmed the cooperation of the Ukrainian and Israeli military special armed forces on the territory of Poland. Israeli elite troops had already begun training hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers in Poland. Until now, the West had trained thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and brought them to the level of the best soldiers in the world. With the geographical location of Israel, the Israeli army has a very high combat capability and experience training. Now, with the cooperation of Poland, Israel, and Ukraine, hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers had the chance to receive training from the Israeli army. This is one of the sharpest steps ever taken by Israel. The subject of interest of the armies of both countries was the Israeli warning system called Tseva Atom for missile attacks planned to be used in Ukraine by Israel. In other words, the Israeli army was training the Ukrainian soldiers on the Tseva Atom early radar defense system, which is expected to be used frequently on the battlefield in the future. The system is designed to detect missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles and follow their trajectories. The Israeli system is expected to allow air warning sounders to be activated faster only where there is a real danger of missile fire or attack by enemy drones. Currently, Israeli special forces in Poland and the Ukrainian military are working closely to implement the Israeli radar warning system. This will also help a lot in saving the lives of civilians in Ukraine. It is planned to connect the civilian warning system to the Ukrainian radar system. This will make it possible to provide faster information to mobile phone owners and to turn on air raid sirens in areas where there is a real threat of rocket fire. The Israeli defense system usually follows their trajectories with radars that target the bombardment areas. The system also calculates the approach time. The siren in the system gives a special signal showing how many minutes or seconds people have to hide. One of the important advantages of this system is that it can calculate the hit time and location of the launched missiles relatively precisely, and thus the operation area of the warning system can be localized according to a certain city. Kornichuk announced that the red color warning system Tseva Atom would be tested in Kiev for the first time. According to the ambassador, the red color radar system will be specially adapted to the conditions of Ukraine. Earlier, Yevhen Kornichuk, Ukraine's ambassador to Israel, stated that the initial deployment would be a pilot zone at best, which would encompass a city like Kiev. If all goes well, the system will be delivered to other parts of Ukraine as well as Kiev. According to Kornichuk, This is the same system that has long been used in Israel. The ambassador noted that the red color warning system, also known as Tseva Adam, was specially adapted to the truth. However, the operating conditions and capabilities of the system in Ukraine will differ due to the characteristics of the weapons used by Russia against Ukraine. The rocket attacks carried out by the Russian Air Force between May 30th and June 2nd showed that the Israeli civilian warning system was gradually starting to meet the integration process in Ukraine. If you remember, before the Israeli army trained the Ukrainian soldiers on the Adam early warning system, at the beginning of May, it announced that it had allocated air defense systems to Kiev again. Following this announcement, Israeli early warning radar was detected in Ukraine. The Israeli Ministry of Defense reported that Israel has begun the delivery of radars to Ukraine for early detection and warning of missile attacks. In total, Ukraine has reported that it will receive 16 such radars, which will significantly strengthen the country's missile threat warning system. The use of these radars will allow the Ukrainian army and people to receive timely information about possible missile attacks, which can reduce the risk of casualties and increase the level of security. The delivery of the first complex has already taken place, and its photo was published by the Israeli side. This delivery proved Israel's readiness to supply such weapons. Still, Ukrainian sources report that 3 of the 16 radars announced were transferred. It is already known that Israeli missile warning systems would be a valuable asset in such a situation, as they will alert the Ukrainian military if an incoming missile or drone needs to be stopped. These Israeli defense systems will help the Ukrainian air defense forces recover valuable and apparently scarce air defense munitions. Also, in a dire situation, the Ukrainian defenders may stop their ammunition if they consider that there will be enough time and warning for people to find shelter before the rockets strike. It is thought that the Ukrainian-Israeli cooperation will continue much more tightly, with the Adam and other Israeli radar systems becoming operational in Ukraine. Because Ukraine is lobbying Israel for more advanced air and missile defense systems like the popular Iron Dome, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement that is exploring the possibility of supplying Ukraine with the cutting-edge Iron Dome anti-missile defense system. Netanyahu said that Israel should review its options and consider its interests in the region. He also added that Israel's contribution will likely be in other areas. Considering that Israel provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine and accepted a large number of Ukrainian refugees, it was predicted that Netanyahu's future aid would be in these areas as well. But the early warning radar system supplied to the Ukrainian army falsified these estimates as a surprise. Israel started to send defense systems to the Ukrainian army, as well as humanitarian aid. As for the Iron Dome, although Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu occasionally gives positive signals, the government continues to linger on the issue. A Ukrainian official said that although Kiev is pleased and appreciated Israel's decision, the country still needs Israel to equip itself with anti-missile systems. With these statements, the Ukrainian authorities were constantly bringing up the much-desired Iron Dome air defense systems. Israel, on the other hand, continues to support the Baltic countries militarily, in addition to the aid it provides to the Ukrainian army. Estonia will soon procure Israeli-made long-range drones as one of its most expensive defense purchases. According to a contract with Israel Aerospace Industries, Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur was photographed with IAIC Boaz Levi in front of a mock-up of the mini Harop system. Pevkur said. He said the contract was worth 100 million euros. The Estonian report on this topic revealed that military officials from the country expect the drones to be delivered by 2024 and then deployed at full capacity by 2025. In summary, Israel, in addition to supporting Kiev and Russia's war against Ukraine, also makes military contributions to Baltic countries such as Estonia, which want to be protected from the effects of this war. Fierce clashes continue on the Ukrainian front lines. In this video, we'll go to the center of the countless bullets, missiles, and bombardments in the most critical war of the century. Bakhmut, the stronghold of the Eastern Front Line, opens the gates of hell to the soldiers of both armies. Bakhmut, located in the Donetsk region, had an area of 40 kilometers squared and a pre-war population of 70,000. The small city, which has a few parks and a few museums on the shores of Solidar Lake, has nothing to stand out. Despite this, Bakhmut has been the most active front of the Ukrainian war in recent times. In the city of Bakhmut, which hosts the most violent clashes of the Eastern Front Line, Ukrainian troops are almost gigantic. Striking developments are taking place in this small city where breathtaking struggles are experienced and the tension doesn't dissipate for a second. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky stated that he and his military leaders will maintain their presence in Bakhmut despite the ongoing Russian aggression in the city. Vladimir Zelensky also stated that he plans to keep the city. Ukrainian forces faced both regular Russian army forces and prisoners gathered by the Wagner special military group and filling their trenches in droves. There were intense clashes between the two as a result of these conflicts. Casualties were, of course, inevitable. However, the Kremlin administration isn't releasing official casualty figures for Bakhmut or elsewhere. Although official casualties were not disclosed, the mostly abandoned city turned into a center of chaos. The Russian army has lost thousands of men in Bakhmut in recent weeks. For every kilometer of land captured around the city of Bakhmut, hundreds of Russian soldiers were eliminated. Russia's Wagner mercenary group led most of the Bakhmut clashes. Wagner group also took a lot of losses in these clashes. In fact, the majority of the soldiers lost in Bakhmut were mercenary fighters. The prolongation of the war continues to negatively affect the Russian army. Russian troops experiencing a lack of equipment and psychological collapse are having a hard time holding on to the front lines. Vladimir Putin's frivolous Bakhmut insistence puts his army in trouble. Russia is almost melting in the small city, which has now become a symbolic conflict between the two countries. The other day, late at night, Russian troops tried to take the offensive. The Russians aimed to infiltrate the Ukrainian trenches by taking advantage of the darkness of night. These efforts of the Russians hit the Ukrainian border guards. Ukrainian border guards repulsed waves of Russian infantry with small arms. Gunshots broke the silence of the night. The clatter of bullets woke the ghost city of Bakhmut from his slumber. Russian soldiers, stunned by the response of the Ukrainian border guards, found the solution to flee. However, early the next day, the Russians wanted to try their luck once again. In the morning, Russian troops made another breakthrough attempt. Ukrainian border guards gave the Russians a déjà vu. Russian troops had watched the trailer of the events to come the night before. The Ukrainian border guards once again repelled the Russian attack with sniper rifles and grenades. Ukrainian border guards looted one of the assault groups using grenades. Thus, the Ukrainian border guards repulsed a total of 4 Russian attacks in Bakhmut Donetsk region. According to the estimates of the Ukrainian General Staff, a platoon of Russian soldiers died and 7 soldiers were injured in this clash. Russian forces continued to suffer significant losses on land in Ukraine. At the same time, the private military company, Wagner Group, has a decreasing trend in the number of soldiers and pro-Russian separatist forces are losing. But UK military intelligence has announced in its latest update that Russian casualties have likely dropped by around 30% compared to the January-March period. The assessment of the UK Ministry Intelligence coincides with the statements of the Ukrainian General Staff. Figures released by the Ukrainian General Staff show that the daily average of 776 Russian casualties in March has dropped to an average of 568 so far in April. British military intelligence stated that Russian casualties were likely reduced as the winter offensive attempts failed to achieve their objectives. UK military intelligence reports that Russian forces are now focused on the anticipated offensive operations in Ukraine. Overall, Russian forces lost between 187,000 and more than 220,000 soldiers killed or wounded. The lower end of the spectrum reflects the claims of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and the upper end reflects the assessments of Western intelligence agencies. According to Ukrainian estimates, in terms of material losses, Russian forces lost more than 24,000 heavy ground weapons systems and vehicles. Independent open-source research firm Oryx estimates that the number of visually verified Russian heavy ground weapons systems is over 10,000. However, the Oryx team acknowledges that their assessment doesn't accurately reflect all the material losses suffered by Russian forces. Whether you're receiving Ukraine predictions or Oryx predictions, one thing is clear: Russian forces lost a significant part of their fighting forces in the war in Ukraine. The worst thing for the Kremlin is that it has no justification for these losses. Russian forces have repeatedly failed to achieve any of the goals set by Moscow, even after revising these goals several times to reflect the situation on the ground. On the other hand, the rate of Russian casualties may have slowed, but the Russian army still suffers from manpower shortages to recruit more soldiers. The Russian Ministry of Defense and its leader, Vladimir Putin, launched a massive new recruiting campaign for volunteers. The goal of the campaign is to attract 400,000 volunteers. Ads across the country target the masculine pride and financial needs of young Russians to attract volunteers to the Russian armed forces. But the Russian military competes with its private military company of the Wagner Group. Yevgeny Prigozhin's mercenary group plays an important supporting role in the Kremlin's special military operation. With the permission of the Russian government, the Wagner Group has recruited massively out of Russian prisons for months. But now that arrangement is over, and the Wagner Group and the Russian army are competing for the same pool of volunteers. How will the rivalry between the Russian army and the Wagner troops turn out? It is not possible to predict this for now, but the rivalry between the two reveals a fact. This fact is Russia's defeats and losses during the war. In addition to the defeats and losses, the problems in the Russian army never end. Vladimir Putin fired a top defense ministry official responsible for military logistics. The dismissal of Colonel General Mikhail Mizentsev comes after Russia's offensive in eastern Ukraine faltered due to ongoing problems with ammunition supplies. Mizentsev was nicknamed the Butcher of Mariupol by the Ukrainian authorities due to the general's role in the attack. This naming was approved by the UK government. Western analysts have questioned whether he was responsible for the city's destruction, including attacks on a maternity hospital, as he was head of the National Defense Administration Center in Moscow at the time. The Russian Defense Ministry did not comment. However, influential Russian military bloggers criticized his dismissal. So who is Colonel Mikhail Mizentsev? Colonel Mizentsev, 60, was promoted to Deputy Defense Minister in September and became responsible for logistics. Mizentsev replaced General Dmitry Bulgakov, who was dismissed due to supply line malfunctions during the initial invasion of Ukraine. With his white hair and icy pale blue eyes, Colonel Mizentsev is one of the few Russian army generals with any profile in the West. He allegedly oversaw Russia's brutal bombardment of Aleppo during the Syrian civil war. The National Defense Headquarters, which Colonel Mizentsev directed until September 20, 2022, coordinates the Russian military's response to events and houses a supercomputer designed to predict the outcome of clashes and the development of rival armies. On the other hand, Russian soldiers fighting around Bakhmut in the Donbass region of Ukraine complained that their artillery supplies were running low. Soldiers mobilized into the Russian army stated that their equipment was substandard. Mizentsev was blamed for the logistical inadequacy of the soldiers. Vladimir Putin dismissed Mizentsev. However, no official reason was given for Colonel Mizentsev's dismissal. Mr. Putin is accused of acting like an armchair military enthusiast throughout the war, changing military commanders and playing with orders, even though there were no soldiers at all. We will wait and see how these moves of Vladimir Putin will affect the situation in other front lines, especially in Bakhmut.